Have you ever wondered why no one talks about this? Why something so obvious, so real, stays hidden, avoided, buried in silence? Not in textbooks, not in universities, not even in mainstream psychology. Because the truth about female nature, the one Carl Jung privately wrote about but never dared to publish, is not comfortable. It's not the soft, polished version of femininity that society prefers. It's something far more raw, more instinctive, more disturbing. Through years of analyzing the unconscious mind, Carl Jung uncovered patterns that most people are still not ready to accept. Beneath the elegance, the compassion, the beauty, there's a side of female nature that operates from something far older, something primitive, a side driven by survival, control, manipulation, seduction, not out of malice, but instinct. These weren't theories created to attack women. They were the brutal psychological realities that surfaced when the masks came off, when the persona collapsed, when the unconscious finally spoke. But the world wasn't ready. Not then. Maybe not even now. And that's why what you're about to hear was never meant to reach the public. It stayed hidden in private notes, journal entries, and quiet whispers between analysts brave enough to confront the shadow. In this video, we're going to unlock what Jung discovered, the uncomfortable truth about female nature that most men sense but can't explain, and that most women embody but will never admit. Take a deep breath, because once you hear this, you won't be able to unhear it. The survival instinct behind female behavior. There's a reason why so many men feel confused, disoriented, and powerless when trying to decode female behavior. It's not because women are irrational. It's not because they're unpredictable. It's because most men are looking at the wrong surface, analyzing the words, the promises, the performances, while completely ignoring the ancient program running beneath it all. Carl Jung understood something that few ever dared to admit. The unconscious drives human behavior far more than logic, reason, or conscious values. And when it comes to female nature, that unconscious is deeply wired for one thing above all: survival. Not survival in the modern sense, not food, not shelter, but psychological, emotional, and genetic survival, the preservation of safety, security, and the most advantageous conditions for herself and her offspring. This is not a flaw. It's not manipulation by design. It's biological and psychological programming running beneath awareness. And once you understand that, suddenly all the confusion begins to fade. The mixed signals, the hot and cold behavior, the sudden withdrawals after intense closeness, the endless testing of boundaries, the obsession with status, power, and emotional leverage. None of this is random. It's not even personal. It's the execution of an unconscious survival strategy that's been shaped by tens of thousands of years of evolutionary pressure, refined, perfected, and embedded so deeply that even the person acting it out doesn't fully realize it. Jung's work on the shadow explains this perfectly. The shadow isn't just the dark side we hide. It's the part of us that holds everything necessary for survival, even if it contradicts our conscious identity. In women, the shadow often manifests through strategies of attraction, selection, testing, and elimination. Not because it's cruel, but because it's how the unconscious ensures safety and advantage in a world that historically offered no guarantees. This is why men often say things like, "I did everything right, and she still left." Or, "She said she wanted a nice guy, but chose the opposite." Because what the conscious mind claims it wants, love, stability, kindness, isn't always what the unconscious is actually seeking. The unconscious is scanning for strength, dominance, resources, emotional mastery, and psychological resilience. Not in the obvious, crude sense, but in subtle ways. The man who doesn't chase, who holds boundaries, who demonstrates value through behavior, not words. The man who is a challenge, who commands respect without demanding it, who cannot be emotionally manipulated. And here's the painful truth. When a man doesn't embody this, even the most loving words, the most loyal actions, the most consistent effort will not override the unconscious rejection that begins to emerge. Because it's not about how much you love her. It's about how safe her unconscious feels in your presence. Not safe in comfort, but safe in strength. This is why you'll witness women unconsciously destroy relationships that look perfect on paper. She'll provoke fights, withdraw intimacy, create chaos, test endlessly. Why? Because her unconscious is searching for proof. Proof that you can handle her storm, that you won't crumble under pressure, that you are emotionally resilient enough to be her anchor, her protector, her mirror. Fail that test, even once, and something begins to die in the connection. You'll feel it. The distance grows. The admiration fades. The affection collapses. Not because of who you are, but because the unconscious survival instinct has decided, quietly, invisibly, that you are not it. Men who don't understand this mistake kindness for connection. But the unconscious feminine doesn't crave comfort. It craves safety through strength. And that's a completely different equation. This is the cruel game nobody talks about. Not because women are evil, not because they're manipulative, but because their own unconscious is running a program older than civilization itself. A program designed not for happiness, but for survival. The feminine shadow doesn't care about fairness. It doesn't care about romance. It doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about this. Are you strong enough? Are you resilient enough? Are you valuable enough to ensure her safety, psychologically, emotionally, and biologically? And if the answer is no, the unconscious begins to do what it always does. Withdraw, dismantle, disconnect, search. Because in her world, even if she doesn't consciously realize it, survival always comes first. The shadow side of female desire. Most men have been sold a lie about female desire. A sweet, innocent romantic fantasy. The idea that women crave only safety, love, loyalty, and emotional connection. And while that's partially true on a conscious level, Jung's work reveals something far more uncomfortable lurking beneath the surface. Something hidden in the shadow. The shadow side of female desire isn't malicious. It isn't evil. But it is brutally primal. It's the side that society forces women to suppress, deny and bury beneath layers of politeness, virtue, and social performance. Yet it operates whether they acknowledge it or not. What does the feminine shadow crave? Power, control, dominance, chaos, mystery, the thrill of unpredictability, the intoxicating magnetism of danger, both emotional and psychological. This is the cruel paradox. What the feminine claims to want consciously is often not what the unconscious responds to most powerfully. You'll hear it in the words, "I just want a kind man, someone who listens, who's always there." But watch the behavior, and you'll see something else. Drawn to the man who isn't fully available, fascinated by the one who doesn't chase, obsessed with the one she can't fully control. Why? Because the feminine shadow desires polarity. It craves the tension between comfort and danger, between safety and uncertainty, between stability and chaos. Carl Jung understood that the shadow contains the parts of ourselves that are rejected by the conscious identity. And in a world that idealizes female innocence, nurturing, and passivity, What gets banished into the shadow is the opposite: aggression, manipulation, seduction, hunger for power, and the instinct to dominate psychologically. This is why the man who becomes too soft, too available, too predictable, the so-called nice guy, often triggers unconscious disgust. Not because kindness is unattractive, but because the shadow perceives excessive availability as weakness, a failure to hold masculine polarity. You were told to be the good man, the reliable man, the ever-present emotional support. And yet, you watched as the one who made her cry, who ignored her texts, who gave her uncertainty, became the one she couldn't stop thinking about. This isn't dysfunction. This isn't an accident. It's biology filtered through the psyche, a deep, unconscious drive that keeps feminine desire alive not through comfort, but through tension. Her shadow doesn't want certainty. It wants to feel the storm. The storm of not fully having you. The storm of wondering whether you'll choose her or whether you could walk away. The storm of not knowing where she stands. And here's the disturbing truth. The moment she fully knows she has you, something dies. The chase ends. The polarity collapses. The shadow gets bored. She won't say this out loud. She may not even be aware of it. But you'll feel it. The slow withdrawal. The coldness creeping in. The sudden shift from obsession to indifference. Why? Because her shadow doesn't crave the man who kneels. It craves the man who stands, firmly, unshaken, sovereign in his presence. The man whose love is a gift, not a negotiation, whose attention must be earned, not assumed. Jung knew that when the unconscious dominates, it behaves autonomously. It runs the show. And until a person becomes conscious of their shadow, they are a puppet to it, believing they're making choices, while their unconscious patterns dictate everything. This is the cruel irony most men will never be told. You were never rejected because you weren't enough. You were rejected because you were too easy to get. And the feminine shadow doesn't value what comes too easily. Why she'll never admit this. There's a reason why women will never admit to this. Not to you, not to their friends, and often not even to themselves. It's not because they're deceitful. It's not because they enjoy watching men suffer. It's because even they are unaware of how much of their behavior is driven by forces buried deep in the unconscious. Carl Jung understood this better than anyone. He taught that the conscious self, the persona, is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies the shadow, the suppressed desires, instincts, fears, and impulses that society, culture, and upbringing forced into hiding. And for women, the social cost of acknowledging these shadow desires is immense. Society rewards the image of the nurturing, compassionate, selfless feminine. It celebrates softness, care, empathy. But it punishes expressions of raw desire, hunger for power, psychological control, and emotional domination. So what happens? The conscious mind disowns it. She convinces herself it isn't there. I would never do that. I don't play games. I just want honesty. But the shadow doesn't care about conscious intentions. It runs the program anyway. This is why she'll tell you, I want a nice guy. And yet, when he shows up, present, reliable, emotionally available, the shadow triggers the opposite response. Boredom, irritation, repulsion. She doesn't understand it. She'll even say, I don't know what's wrong with me. But nothing is wrong. It's the unconscious operating exactly as it's designed, ensuring polarity, maintaining attraction through tension, protecting survival through selecting the strongest possible mate on an unconscious level. And here's the cruel twist. She can't admit it without breaking her own identity. To admit that she desires dominance, psychological challenge, unpredictability, and the intoxicating pull of what she can't fully control would shatter the very persona she believes herself to be. Worse, society isn't ready to hear it either. Because if the world accepted that female desire isn't soft, passive, or purely romantic, but instead laced with manipulation, testing, seduction, and emotional power games, it would dismantle the fragile illusions that hold relationships, marriage, and even entire cultures together. So it stays hidden. She hides it from you. She hides it from herself. And yet, you felt it. Every man has. The confusing hot and cold, the testing, the withdrawal after closeness, the sudden mood shifts that make no logical sense. It's not random. It's not accidental. It's the unconscious shadow doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And here's the final punch. She's not lying. She genuinely believes the story her conscious mind is telling. That she's fair. That she's innocent. That she's not like the others. Because the greatest trick the shadow ever pulled was convincing the conscious mind that it doesn't exist. This is why men stay stuck in confusion, frustration, and self-blame. Because you were never playing the game you thought you were. The real game was happening underneath the surface. Invisible, unspoken, denied. And until you learn to see the shadow for what it is, you are not free. Why you were doomed from the start. Here's the cruelest reality that almost no one has the courage to say out loud. You were doomed long before the first date, before the first text, before the first smile. And not because you failed, not because you weren't good enough, not because of anything you consciously did, but because you were operating in a reality that no one ever taught you how to navigate. From the very beginning, the moment you showed up with kindness, honesty, attention, and emotional openness, you believed that this was what builds connection, what earns loyalty, what creates love, because that's what you were told your whole life. Be a good man, be dependable, be available, be consistent, be supportive. But here's what nobody told you. None of that matters to the unconscious. Not hers. Not yours. Because beneath her conscious desire for love, loyalty, and partnership, something else was running. Something ancient. Something older than civilization itself. A survival program so deeply embedded in her unconscious that even she doesn't fully understand it. Her shadow wasn't listening to your words. It wasn't analyzing how nice you were, how often you texted, or how much you cared. It was scanning you, silently, automatically, asking questions you couldn't hear. Can he lead? Can he survive my chaos? Will he collapse under pressure? Does he need me more than I need him? Can he be controlled? And the moment, the precise moment, that her unconscious detected softness disguised as availability, or neediness disguised as affection, or weakness hidden behind consistency, the clock started ticking. You felt it. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The shift, the distance, the change in tone, the coldness after warmth, the sudden emotional withdrawal that made no logical sense. You didn't change. She didn't change. What changed was the answer her unconscious gave to those questions. And here's the brutal truth. Once her unconscious makes that decision, it's irreversible. You cannot talk your way back. You cannot prove your worth. You cannot explain how much you care. You cannot become more available, more patient, or more understanding to fix it. Because none of that speaks to the unconscious. It was never a logical decision. This is where most men collapse. Out of confusion, panic, desperation, you try harder. You give more. You apologize for things you didn't even do. You become more present, more loving, more emotionally available. And every step you take pushes her further away. Because what her unconscious shadow is really scanning for isn't the man who offers everything. It's the man who doesn't need to. The man whose value is non-negotiable. The man who can walk away without flinching. The man whose presence is a privilege, not a right. This is the savage polarity her shadow craves. Not because she's broken, not because she's cruel, but because this is the primal mechanism of attraction coded into the feminine psyche. Her unconscious doesn't care how much you love her. It cares how much you love yourself. And if you don't, if you surrender your center, if you abandon your own sovereignty for the illusion of connection, the attraction dies. Slowly, quietly, but irreversibly. It doesn't matter how perfect the relationship looked on paper. It doesn't matter how magical it felt in the beginning. If you didn't show emotional resilience, strength, boundaries, and self-sufficiency from day one, not as an act, not as a strategy, but as your natural state, you were always disposable to the shadow. Not because she consciously chose that. Not because she's a bad person. But because her unconscious survival program made the decision for her. Without words. Without logic. Without warning. And here's where most men stay trapped. Confused. Lost. Blaming themselves. Wondering what they could have done differently. The truth? You were never taught how the game actually works. And that's exactly why I created a method to help you break this cycle, to finally understand how your own mind works, how to become immune to this psychological storm, and how to rebuild the only thing that truly attracts permanently, your inner power. If you're ready to stop guessing and start mastering this, check the link for the ebook. It's not just theory, it's a tool, a map, a lifeline. Because now, you see it. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. The only way out. At this point, the question most men ask themselves is the same. So, what am I supposed to do? And here's the uncomfortable answer. You cannot fix this by changing her. You cannot win this by convincing her. You cannot escape this by trying harder. The only way out is brutal and paradoxical. You win this game the moment you stop playing it. You stop trying to win her approval. You stop negotiating for her validation. You stop proving your worth to someone whose unconscious has already decided whether you are valuable or not. You step out of the frame entirely. You reclaim the one thing the feminine shadow respects more than anything else: your sovereignty, your detachment, your ability to walk away without fear. Because whether you realize it or not, her unconscious is always testing for it. Testing whether you belong to yourself, or whether you've handed her the keys to your identity. And when she feels, not hears, but feels, that your value does not fluctuate based on her mood, her availability, or her attention, something shifts. That's when the dynamic flips. That's when the pull returns. That's when the feminine realizes she cannot fully possess you. And paradoxically, that's exactly when she desires you most. Not because you withdrew affection, not because you manipulated, not because you played games, but because you became psychologically untouchable, a man who exists in his own frame, a man who holds his own gravity. And here's the real punch. You don't do this for her. You don't do this to get her back. You don't do this to become more attractive. You do this because it is the only way to stay sane in a world where the unconscious plays by rules no one taught you. You become the man who no longer collapses when tested, who no longer negotiates his value, who no longer trades his self-respect for scraps of affection. Because that is the only man the shadow cannot consume. The cruelest part about everything you've just heard is this: no one was ever going to tell you. Not her. Not society. Not even your own friends. Because admitting this truth means tearing down the comfortable lies that hold the entire illusion together. The lie that love is unconditional. The lie that being a good man is enough. The lie that effort equals loyalty. It doesn't. It never did. You were taught to be the safe man, the reliable man, the endlessly available man. And you learned the hard way. Nothing kills desire faster. Now you know the truth. You were never rejected because you weren't good enough. You were rejected because you were too easy to have. The real question is, what are you going to do about it? Because once you see the game, you can never unsee it. And the men who refuse to learn this, they don't lose to her. They lose to themselves. You were her safest choice, but never her deepest desire.